In this lecture, I want to be talking about complexity thinking in relation to systems thinking. If you've got the slides pulled up there, we're on the slide that says, I think it's slide 17, complexity thinking. And as we think about those initial thoughts, understand this is a subdiscipline of systems thinking. So it connects to that big concept of systems thinking. It's just kind of one of the sub things underneath it. And you'll see it sums it up right there, that second bullet point that says complexity thinking recognizes that human organizations are complex, not just complicated. And when I was back in doc school, a friend of mine, a guy that I went through several classes with, he expressed this idea of the difference between complexity and being complicated. And I remember looking at him at first and being like, well, what do you mean? And he said it this way. He said, a computer is complicated, how it works, the operating system, everything else. But with enough knowledge and training and skills and things like that, you can figure it out. Whereas a human organization is complex, right? Personalities are complex. We'll never figure them out completely. And so that's the idea. So when we accept that about human organizations, I mean, they can be complicated for sure, don't get me wrong, but they're complex, not just complicated. Because if they were just complicated, the org chart is complicated, fine, but give me enough time, I'll figure it out. Whereas complexity comes in with human organizations. Think about, we talked about power and influence. Well, who has the real power in the organization, right? Sometimes you find out it's not the CEO, it's not the C-suite people, right? The real power is this person over here. They've been here the longest and they have the knowledge, and so they've got the real power in the organization. They're the ones you talk to get things done, and they grease the wheels and all those different expressions that we use, right? So that's what we mean by human organizations are complex. And the reality is, because they're human organizations, they're made up of people, and players, to use that term, come and go, the complexity is always changing and shifting, right? So you got that one person who's been here the longest, and so they've got all the power. Well, then they retire. Well, now who, right? So who gets the power baton, so to speak, passed to them, right? And so that's why human organizations are complex, because they're shifting, they're changing. Sometimes we see this, and this is where change can be difficult for people. I think of some of the higher ed institutions I've been part of. If one major has always been kind of the powerhouse program, the academic program, but things shift and things change, and now all of a sudden their enrollment is decreasing and this program's enrollment is increasing. All of a sudden, the faculty, the department heads, the people who are part of this program, now they may have more say and power, and these people aren't willing to relinquish it, right? So those are those power dynamics. So again, that's why it's complex. And when we recognize this, and when we get a kind of a handle, so to speak, on complexity thinking, meaning just reviewing it as a complex organization, that also helps us deal with just the sheer messiness of human systems. Why are human organizations messy? Because they're made up of people. It's that simple. Think about our human relationships, our marriages, our family dynamics, parents and children, things like that. They're messy most of the time. Why? Because they're human beings involved, and we're just complex and messy, and we have emotions and ideas and everything else. So those are good things, but they also make it messy. You can't be mechanistic with human relationships, and the same with our organizations. So then that leads us to the concept of complex adaptive systems, which is a really big fancy way, so to speak, using a lot of big words, of just saying, again, human organizations are complex and they're messy, but they're also adaptive. They're constantly growing. So this stands in contrast, though, to both ordered and chaotic systems. And if you think about it as a spectrum, so to speak, you would see ordered at one end, chaotic at the other. Viewing an organization as an ordered system, that would be the old mechanistic, classical management viewpoint. That's what you're dealing with ordered. So I think that makes sense. Chaotic, there's a whole view of organizations as chaotic systems, meaning, and there's chaos theory, and I mean that applies in physics. There's a whole realm of chaos out there, but viewing organizations as chaotic systems basically says can't do anything. They're just going to be constantly changing and in and out and things like that. So the concept of a complex adaptive system is in contrast to both of those views, because it says, no, it isn't just this perfectly ordered system. It's not mechanistic. We can't just take a piece out and tweak it and leave it alone, and it won't have any bearing on anybody else. But nor is it so far out of control that it's just chaos. It is complex. We're understanding how all of this works together. And then it's also adaptive. It shifts and it changes, and it responds to its environment and to what's going on. And then that you see there, those second two bullets there on slide 19 are kind of on the same idea. A system is created when the actors within that system are interdependent. So, I mean, think about the human body. It is a system, right? And most of you, I think, come from a healthcare background, so you're much more aware of that than I am. You've done a lot more study of those things. But our bodies are interdependent, the systems and the processes and everything else. Well, human organizations are interdependent, are created as systems when the actors are interdependent. So basically, as soon as a human organization is formed, it becomes a system, right? Because we're interdependent. Now, obviously, the big question is, do we recognize ourselves as being interdependent? But we are. And so you have a system. And the complexity part comes in because then those interdependencies make our systems highly dynamic, and we shift between stability and chaos, right? There are times in our organizations when things are clicking along just fine, life seems to be good, and then something happens and it feels very chaotic and disruptive for a little while. But then we start to get back to a norm and a normative system, and then we're able to adapt and change, and we keep going. Classic example, again, is COVID, right? COVID was a highly disruptive event for all organizations. And so, I mean, you think about higher ed. And so in higher ed, all of a sudden, we're shifting, for some people, in a week's time, from teaching face-to-face to now everything's online, and I'm having to adapt and change to that. And what is this going to do to then enrollment, because we were in this period of the unknowns and people are scared and everything else. And it took us a while and so we adapted to those things, and then it took us a while to come out of that and to get back to a more stable situation. Depending on the organization, depending on personality, we may or may not be 100% stable, even 5 years down the road, right? But there are also, most organizations change somewhat. I don't know. I'm guessing most organizations, now maybe retail stores, things like that, but most organizations like colleges and businesses there was some adaptation that is still there. They changed their operations in some way because of COVID. They adapted. Now, again, some have gone back to partial days in the office, and so things like that. So again, it just shows how we move between stability and chaos. So how do we apply complexity thinking, complexity theory in organizations? Well, a couple of ways. First of all, recognize and embrace our interdependence. I think about it this way. If you want to think of a restaurant, let's just use a restaurant for a simple example. If our restaurant, we're looking at it, and I'm the owner of the restaurant, and I say, you know what, we need to get the food out faster. Our patrons are waiting too long for their meals, right? So I look at it and I say, aha, we need more cooks in the kitchen. We need more prep, sous chef and head chef and cooks and everything else, line cooks, all of that, right? So I hire several more people in the kitchen. Do we produce, are we able to get the food made faster, plated, and everything else? Yes. But if you're thinking with me, you go, well, wait a minute. Is that going to mean the food gets out faster? Not necessarily, because I may have increased the rapidity with which we plate the food, but I still have to have the wait staff to get the food from there to the table, because now all of a sudden I fix that, so the food is being plated up much faster, but it's still slow getting to the table. Now we have an increasing complaints of food being cold by the time it gets to the table, right? So that's just a real easy example where sometimes we think very silo and we don't have the complexity thinking to realize, well, wait a minute, if I make a tweak over here, I hire more cooks, I'm going to plate the food faster, but that doesn't necessarily mean I get it out any faster if I haven't hired enough wait staff. So I'm going to throw my training and development hat on for a minute. This is where we then in training and development would come in and go, well, wait a minute, time out. Before we hire more cooks or hire more wait staff or whatever, let's take a step back and really do a problem analysis, and let's figure out where is the problem, right? It's called a needs analysis in the official language. So we need to do a needs analysis and figure out, do we actually need to hire more people? Maybe that's not the issue. Maybe it's a training issue or something like that, or maybe it's the way it's set up or whatever. And again, that's getting very mechanistic in a kitchen environment, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. So we've got to be able to handle these changes. So again, let's say in a college, your enrollment department and admissions department, man, they're killing it and they're marketing and they're getting all these students admitted and then applied and admitted and everything else. And all of a sudden you look at your roster and you're like, wait a minute, I now have 40 people in this class and I only have 20 seats. And they go, well, just split it. I don't have capacity, right? So that's where, again, it's just we've got to think systems. Can we handle this? And that's where we recognize that. So we recognize and embrace our interdependence. And therefore, we need to have communication and dialogue throughout the organization. And we need to know, okay, what are we talking about and everything else? I remember when I was at the school in South Carolina, and I mean, this is a little thing, but it helped. So the marketing department, they were doing a bunch of promo materials, and so they got some guys, and they took a bunch of pictures in a lab because they were trying to promote the STEM programs. Well, from a marketing standpoint, they're like, we need to make the mixtures look really cool. And so they added like all these colored dyes to water to show up. And the science faculty looked at it and like, what is this? They're like, nothing in our labs looks like this. And so they're like, okay, we need to go back and reshoot, because if you have students who are serious about STEM, they're going to look at that and go, are you kidding me? This looks like, some sort of elementary school, like, little kid got a hold of the Easter egg dye, just since it's almost Easter, I'm thinking of that, right? It's like, we got a bunch of multicolors in here. That's not what chemicals look like. So it's just things like that. We want to have communication dialogue throughout the organization. And then we want to be a learning organization. And this is utilizing what are called feedback loops. And I mentioned those already. And that's where I am not just throwing out there, but I'm seeking feedback, and then I'm getting it, and then I actually do something with it, and then I try it again and get more feedback, and we keep going back and forth. So that's what it means to be a learning organization. So hopefully all of this has helped you understand a little bit more about systems thinking. Gonna be honest, we could spend a whole semester on systems thinking. This is pretty much a crash course in it, but hopefully there's some good application for you.